Hello, you guys. Welcome to my little paintbrush. My name is Cami, and I'm glad you're here today. We get to paint daisies together. I love daisies. They were my wedding flower. They're just bright, happy, all the spring things. So I'm glad you're here. Hopefully you have our paint kit, because if you do, you are going to have this prepped on your canvas ready to go. You're going to have all the paint colors that I'm going to use. You're going to have brushes. You're going to have a paper towel. All the things. You're going to be set. But if you don't have our paint kit, don't stress. You can get our pattern on our website. Also, this is pretty simple. That's what makes this painting so great. It's basic, but it's a statement piece. So you can easily grab a pencil and a canvas or even a piece of paper and sketch this out, and then grab some paints and just dive in with me. This would be a beautiful watercolor as well. So don't ever let your tools be an excuse as to why you don't create. We're here to have fun, so let's do that. A couple of tips before we start. Please feel free to always pause during this tutorial. You do not need to paint at my pace, okay? You can paint at your pace. You can pause, you can rewind steps and watch again. You can even do half of this today and half tomorrow because you're doing it at home and you're not under pressure to have it done at a certain time. So really just allow this to be what it needs to be for you, okay? Let's look at the brushes that we have for today. We have one of my all-time favorites, a number 12 flat. If you have our kit, your brushes look a little different than this, but they're the exact same sizes. We've got a number 12 flat, we've got a number 6 round, and then we have a number 2 detail. These are great for all ages, so keep that in mind. They work great, littles, big, whatever you are, these are great brushes, okay? And those are the ones that we would recommend. Now, I would suggest that you grab a jar or two of water. I say jar because I like to encourage people to find a more weighted something to put your water in. If you use like a plastic or paper cup, when you're swishing that brush, it could tip over. So you might just want to find something that's glass or a little heavier. And we always encourage 2 jars of water so that you always have clean water available to you. So kind of pick one that can be your washing and the other one can be your rinsing and your clean water to dilute your paint in. Okay, now let's jump in and get started. We're going to start with our number 12 flat and we're going to put our background in. So I'm going to get my brush wet, just swish it around. And let's look, our palette is really simple today, and I just love that because it kind of reminds us that it doesn't take a lot to get a really beautiful piece, okay? So my background is a really light sagey green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush, grab a scoop of that green, bring it over to some white, and mix that together. Now, if you have our paint kit, I would encourage you to kind of separate your paints onto your plate or your palette like this, okay? And the reason we always have multiple piles of white is so we don't contaminate our white with our colors, and then when we need clean white, we can't find it. The other good tip is to always move paint into a pile to mix it and not just scoop it, drop it, and mix the whole thing, because you don't know when you're going to need more of that color, and truthfully, you don't know how much of a color you need, so kind of just start with a little bit because you can always add, but you can't take away. Once you have the color you love, which this right here is just gorgeous, I'm in love with it, we're going to use this for our background. I'm going to loosen it up with some water. Again, your paint should always be the consistency of melted ice cream. Okay, that's just what your canvas is going to need, and we're using acrylic paint and that's what it needs. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now we are going to fill in our entire background. Yes, we're going to paint right over our jar, right over our stems. We're going to paint around the center of our flowers, but if you get paint in there, and don't stress it, okay? Just really relax. Really let this be a nice, relaxing experience for you. And know that creating is meant for that. It's meant for us to relax. It's not meant to stress us out. If we're feeling stressed out, we need to just not take ourselves too seriously. Okay, now look, I'm going around the center of my flowers. But other than that stroke, I want to keep a very vertical brush stroke, okay? Now, depending on how light or dark you have chosen your background to be, that will really determine how many layers your background needs, okay? Another thing that will determine that is the amount of white you use. If you use a lot of white paint, you're gonna have better coverage. Believe it or not, white is got a ton of pigment in it. It's our most pigmented paint, and it just allows that beautiful coverage. So you can see I continue to bounce back into my water and then mix that water into my paint because it's just gonna need it. It's gonna need it the whole time. Acrylic paint, you know, surprisingly, and people are always kind of a little bit shocked by this, but it doesn't come out of the bottle or the tube or the jar ready for paint. It is ready for paint. It's not ready to use as paint. It needs water immediately is what I'm trying to say. But you know, I'm just struggling with my words is what's happening. So I'm trying to keep this brush stroke as vertical as I can as I'm going around the centers here of my daisies. So I am painting on a mixed media paper, okay? You might be doing the same, but if you have our paint kit, you're painting on a canvas. We've always taught on mixed media paper for many reasons, but the one thing I always have to remind people is as I'm painting on this paper, I don't have the edges of the wrapped canvas that you have. And so I don't have edges to worry about. However, you do, okay? And we have always kind of been sticklers for wrapping those edges. We really believe that that finishes your painting really, really well. So I would encourage you to take this background color all the way around your canvas, the top, the edges, and the bottom. Paint all your edges. That way it's nice and completed. It's ready for you to display, to hang on the wall, to lean on a shelf, to give as a gift, whatever the reason is for this painting. Wrap those edges, complete the piece, okay? Really focus in on that. All right, how are we doing? Got our background going in pretty good. Again, how many layers? What's your paint doing? What do you need to do? Do you need more than one layer? What's the status? That's really individual. That's going to be completely up to the color, the amount of white, all those things. Like I said, you can add another layer. You can pause this video, let your first layer dry, and then add another layer. One thing when we do these tutorials, when we do recordings, you can't see it, but there are lights all around me. I'm glowing. I feel like I'm glowing. Okay, we're trying to get the best light for you. And so it happens when we do that, is my paint dries like crazy fast because of all that heat. And so I really have to work quickly. But also I'm just getting my paint, my paint's just drying quicker. And so sometimes I'm able to do a layer and then add another one real quick, and you're not able to do that. So like I said, pause the video, fan it with, you know, a paper plate is what I usually use to fan my painting because I always have them handy, but you can fan it with a piece of paper. You can fan it with, you can use a blow dryer if you want, just keep it on a low setting and don't use your heat is the other thing. So here we are. We've got a little bit of bubbling happening on my paper, so I'm going to try and smooth it out while you guys finish your background. Beautiful sagey green background. I love it. I didn't realize it when I created this piece, but I did create my wedding. The green was my wedding color, daisies were my wedding flower, and it just so happened to be what happened. So, I mean, that's what happens when you create sometimes. You just create things in your head that you may have forgotten about or didn't realize you were doing. So it's kind of fun that way. Okay, so I'm washing my brush. One thing to keep in mind is put that brush all the way to the bottom and then really kind of swish back and forth. You've got to touch the bottom of your jar or you're not actually washing anything. You're just changing the color of your water. So we don't want to do that. All right, once you have your background in and it's dry, we are going to paint in our jar. So I'm gonna get my detail brush, that's my number 2. I'm gonna get it wet and come into my white paint and just kind of loosen some of that white paint up with my number 2 detail brush, okay? Detail brush is just what it sounds like. It's used for details, okay? And we don't want to use this. A lot of beginner artists will look at this little brush and they'll be like, that's the brush I want to use for all my detail, my whole painting, because I feel in control with this brush. You don't want to do that because you'll give it a bad hair day is what will happen. And then it won't give you those beautiful little strokes. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to outline our jar. So I've got my detail brush with my white paint on it. And I've got my background dry. And just as carefully as I can, and you should be able to still see that pencil mark. If you don't, you might need to freehand, which is so doable. You guys don't even know how capable you are. Freehanding jars especially, you can do it. This is going to need a couple of layers. We're just going to put one in to start here. I'm going to go around and just get the mouth of our jar here. We're going to try and keep the same width. So we're going to try and keep the same pressure as we go around. But you know, this is hand painted. And oftentimes, I've taught thousands of people, you guys, and that's not even an exaggeration, okay? I've taught thousands, all different ages. The one thing I have to remind people more than anything else is, guess what? This is a hand painted piece, and believe it or not, it'll look like it, okay? We are so used to prints and computer images that are perfect, and it's kind of taken away from us the ability to appreciate something that's been hand painted. And unfortunately, I do the same thing because I kind of expect a higher standard, right? We hold these paintings to a higher standard, but it's going to look like you hand painted it. So all those little imperfections, those brush strokes, the little things that you're constantly like, I don't want that in my painting. Those are the things that indicate, hey, this was hand painted. This is special. Okay, so I've got that in. And you can see I just kind of went over things multiple times, you know, just to kind of try to get my lines a little bit more equal in width. Doing our best. That's coming in. What we're going to do is we're going to put our stems in next. That way we can kind of understand our jar better, because we want our stems to look like they're in our jar, right? So the stems are going to go through the back line, the back rim of the jar, but they're not going to go through this front part, okay? So we can actually look, it can look like they're inside. So I'm going to keep my detail brush. It still has white paint on it. I'm going to come over to my green and just kind of mix in some of that white. Again, for the purpose of coverage, okay? Obviously, I don't want it the color of my background. Then I would lose my stems, so not a ton of white. I'm also going to grab a teeny bit of brown, okay? And mix it so it kind of deepens that green slightly, You don't have to do this. In fact, if you want your painting to be a little bit brighter, you can even add the yellow that's really wanting, look at my yellow is just wanting to join the green so badly as I tip this over. But you get that nice sort of deeper muted sage green, different from our background. Loosen it up with some water, dip your brush in water, and then just swish that water into your paint. And once you have it loosened up a little bit, we're gonna follow our stems through the jar. Now, instead of going, okay, I go through this rim and then I start before that one, we're not gonna think about it. We're just gonna put our stem straight down. If your jar rim is still a little bit wet, it's white, it'll flow with it, it's fine, don't worry about it, okay? So I'm gonna start with my biggest, tallest stem, and again, just the best that I can, I'm gonna take it down. Now you might be sitting at home going, okay, my brush stroke did not last all the way down my canvas. Now let me tell you, if you are not using your water, it won't, okay? This isn't a difference between paper and canvas. This is a difference between diluting your paint and not, okay? You should be able to, whether you're painting on paper or canvas, you should be able to pull that stroke down all the way and at least get the majority of the stem in before your paint stroke breaks. You should be able to, okay? So really check the paint consistency and make sure that your paint is diluted. I'm just gonna try and thicken up that edge a little bit. So we've got one stem. Let's do the others. So canvases have little pockets of little pockets, okay? I was gonna say of something, but that didn't make any sense. Those pockets, those grooves in your canvas are kind of, I always tell people, you know, if you've had a manicure or a pedicure, they buff up your nails before they paint them so that the nail polish will sort of have something to stick to and last longer. This is the same concept with the canvas. It's not super smooth. And so your paint has the ability to kind of stay on there better. Okay? And that's why you've got those grooves. The frustrating thing is when we're trying to fill in a canvas and those grooves, we're fighting those grooves, and that's when diluting your paint is really going to help you. Guys, look at these beautiful stems. You can see right now they're totally outside the jar, and that's what I was talking about. It's like this weird, like, wait, they're not in the jar. We're going to wash our detail brush and let them sit outside our jar for a minute. You can see these two stems made contact with each other. I really like that. I like that it's not perfect and they're just kind of naturally put in this jar. All right, let's go to the center of our daisies. Back to my flat brush, grab some white and grab some of this yellow. It's definitely gonna need some white, okay? We're gonna put the first layer in, it's gonna be quite bright. The second one, we're gonna tone it down a little bit. Okay, so we get that. Now if you need to dilute this paint, we wanna make sure we're using that clean water because yellow will show that murky water, and that's not what we want. Okay, so center of our daisies, we're just gonna fill that in. This is, remember, first layer, so if you have, like me, some of your background has kind of bled into this as you were doing your background and you can see it. Listen, yellow shows everything off. It literally will take layers and layers for yellow to hide something. So that's one reason why we're gonna do 2 layers. And this first one is just like, lay it down, let it dry, and trust the process. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're trusting the process today. Okay? And you guys are gonna be amazed at how quick, like we're almost done. This painting, When I created it, I had all the ladies in mind, because ladies, like this, the more simple the better, right? But they want that statement. And so this is like that statement piece, but again, you can use, they take up hours to do this, and that's totally fine. If you need that, that's why I say pause it, because we really want to take our time and we want this to be perfect, right? We want it to be incredible. And so if you need to take that time, take that time. All right, I'm bouncing back to my detail brush and my white paint, because now I'm going to finish up my jar. Again, my stems are dry, okay, because I am shining over here, okay, with all these lights. So my stems are dry, and I can go ahead and jump right into my jar. If your stems need a minute, or maybe you're still filling in the center of those flowers, no problem. Finish that up and then come back. If you're ready, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna close in our stems. So we're gonna come right across those stems that we put through that line, okay? And we're gonna close it up. And we might have to do this step a couple of times, a few layers, right? So that we can really cover those stems, because they are a darker green, so they're kind of poking through a little bit. But we're gonna get there, don't worry. We're gonna add a few little reflections of light into our jar. This is a glass jar. So right here, I'm just going to add a stroke, okay? It's gonna come through a couple of the stems like that. And you can even connect it to that corner of the jar. Okay, and just whoop, just a little stroke. How we doing? And then we're gonna do one off this side, but it's gonna be a little shorter. Okay, we're gonna come and just have a little bit shorter. Look how this jar, there are some things that I'm just really fascinated with painting. Jars are one of them, and it's because it doesn't take much for something to almost become that realistic looking thing that you're like, oh, that's what I wanted, and it comes so easily, you know. I'm gonna put in some extra paint on those areas where the stems are. Try and cover that up. You know, make it a little thicker there, whatever you need to do. Gorgeous. You can let it dry, and then if, you know, at the end you're like, it's still not giving me the coverage I want, you can put another layer in. You can put as many as you want. As long as you've got that paint, use it. I'm gonna rinse my flat brush. Just, you see me peeking over here, not looking at the camera. It's because I have my reference photo on the wall behind like kitty corner. So I'm looking at it to make sure I've got all my steps right. And so what I want to do now is I want to put in some reflections of light. So I want a fairly dry brush. It's okay if it has some water in it, but you don't want it super drippy. And then you just want the teeniest bit of white. Okay, I'm just going to check that. So pretty dry brush with just a little bit of white in it. And then we're going to brush. I might need more white than that. We're going to brush through here. And what we're doing is we're creating this reflection, right? And I'm putting pressure at the beginning of my brush stroke, and then I'm just letting it kind of fade, okay? And I'm going to follow. See how I'm following the shape of the jar on this side here? I'm following that shape, and then I'm just fanning it out, okay? And I want to take some of these long and some of them are shorter. Point is, I want to reflect light as naturally as possible, okay? And you go right through those stems, okay? No big deal. You're doing some light reflecting, okay? And we're gonna do some here. Again, I'm gonna peek over at my reference. We're gonna do a few strokes over here. Okay, and then we're going to come up to the mouth here, or right before the mouth of the jar. And we're gonna do another one that's kind of a bit longer, but it still breaks off. Okay, again, right through the stem. This is reflecting light. And then up here, we're actually gonna pull it down. And pull it down in between our stems. This is the back, okay? Again, best way to kind of help you with this process is to, you've probably been experiencing broken brush strokes as you've been fighting your canvas, trying to figure out how to get coverage on your canvas. The grooves in your canvas that we talked about are causing you problems, and you're not able to get the coverage that you want, and it's super frustrating. This is when you can put that to use and go, I want my brush stroke to break. That's what I want, okay? All right, this jar looks fabulous. It's time to do some petals. So I'm gonna wash my brush out, swish it out really good. You can mess with those reflections as much as you want. And it's pretty forgiving, because if you mess up on those reflections too much and you're just feeling frustrated with yourself, you can actually, without a problem, go over it with your background color and put some more in. And they can be darker or lighter. I'm trying to see if they are dark enough for you guys to see on the camera. Sometimes it picks up differently. It's just like a little kiss of reflection in the glass. All right, let's do our petals. Let's grab our number 6 round and let's get it wet and loosen up some white paint. Okay, so I'm getting it in clean water. This is why you want those 2 jars, because now we're in white and we really want clean water. Okay, so I'm going to get it in there and then swish it around, loosen it up. Okay, loose paint is helpful. Okay, that we know. Okay, let's talk about these. We have these daisies that are kind of curved forward. As they curve forward, the petals on the bottom are a little bit smaller, the ones at top are bigger. Okay, so that's the concept that we're going with. I'm going to show you 2 different pressure points that you can do with your brush as we do these. You can start at the top of your petal and you can come down and then get smaller with your stroke. So you can start at the top, and then as you get closer to the center, you can lighten your stroke, or you can do the opposite way. You can start at the beginning of your stroke lightly and then press as you come out. Now let's look at where I put my first petals. Okay, I put one at the top and one at the bottom, and I did that for reference. Okay, so I'm not going do and coming around and then I'm like, wait, I have this much space, then I can't put 2 petals, but it'll look weird with one. That's why we're doing it this way. Now we're gonna do it on these sides. Again, you can start at the top or you can start at the bottom of your petal, okay? On the sides, your petals are gonna begin curving slightly, right? And they're gonna be a little bit bigger than the bottom petal, but they're not gonna be as big as the top, because now we're starting to get smaller, right? So now we have those 4. So now we can build on that. Let's see, what do I want to do? I switch. I switch all the time. I go from beginning of the petal to the end of the petal all the time. These are also our first petals. We'll go back and do another layer so they can get, bigger as you go. So now as we're going, our petals are going to get smaller, and they're also going to start to slant, right? As we go around, our petals are going to start turning as we go. See, I'm changing it up again. And you can see, oh, that petal got bigger than that one. So I'm not going to worry about that, because like I said, these are my first petals. Okay, I'm going to come back again and I'm going to add another layer to them. So these petals See, we're gonna go around as we get closer to that center one. I'm gonna come back, right? I'm gonna come back and I can add to my petals. But this is the basic flower. Look how easy that is. Now you have the option to touch the center of your daisy or to like leave your petals kind of floating. Sometimes I like the floating look, sometimes they touch. You can do it however you want. But now that you know kind of the flower motion here, how you're gonna do these petals, you can just rock and roll. And so flowers are one of those things, like they're like clouds to me. Once you get it figured out, when you start, you're like, this is miserable and I don't like it. Like I'm not enjoying myself. And then you figure it out and you're like, all I want to do is paint flowers. I feel that way with clouds. I am obsessed. Oh, that petal got kind of large, but you know, I'm embracing what I told you guys to embrace. This is hand painted. Pressure at the beginning. We lighten up as we come around, right? Lighten up our stroke as we come. Or if you're doing the opposite, right, it's going to get, it's going to start heavy and then it's going to, depending on what direction you have chosen to take your petals. Okay, but you get the idea. And look, I'm looking up, I have screens everywhere, you guys. So when I look somewhere else and you're like, where is she going? I'm looking at our creation, okay? Isn't this fun? So I've painted these before where sometimes everybody's petals are touching and sometimes they're not, like these. You do you. I mean, I think it's beautiful either way. I actually had an artist one time paint this and I literally envied so much her approach to the flower. It was just so beautiful and full. So if you're like, I want my flower to be a little bit fuller, your petals can touch. They can certainly touch, okay? I mean, you are the creator here of this painting. And so you need to embrace that. And I also tell people, you're the one looking at your painting, right? After we're done creating, this is yours, unless you're giving it as a gift, of course. But you're the one that has to look at it. So why do it in such a way that I think is beautiful or the person next to you think it's beautiful? You should do it the way that you like it because you're the one looking at it and you're the one that's going to be like, man, I wish I would have done this or I wish I would have done that. So keep that in mind too. Oh, aren't these fun? I mean, I have so much fun with this painting. I just love it. Okay, when you get all your petals in, you can go back with your second layer. Even if it's not all the way dry, you should be fine to just put it in unless it's like really thick and sticky. Otherwise, you can go in with your second layer, and this is when you can really decide if you're gonna touch the center of your flower or if you're just gonna have them floating. You can also change the thickness of your petals. You know, you can change the height of some of them. You can just, sky's the limit. There is nobody holding you back. You can curve them more, you know, fill it out more if you want to. You have the main ones in there, so now you can just really roll with it and make it exactly what you want or close to, okay? Because here's the thing. Are our paintings ever gonna walk away? Are we gonna walk away and go, that, like, I'm amazing? I've heard some artists say it, but it's pretty rare. Even for me, I usually don't like my paintings after they're done. It takes me a few days. I have to step away from it And so, you know, that's okay. That's okay. We're just gonna keep rolling. And we're just gonna be like, I am embracing nature. Funniest story. I was just in Hawaii with my family. Spring break. We were in Kauai. This one's really tricky for me to get to. It's kind of up here at a weird angle. That's the other thing I was going to mention to you guys and I forgot. You can spin your canvas around. You don't have to paint upright the whole time. I do because of all my equipment. And it's really tricky. So if you want to flip your canvas around, you need to do that so you don't feel super uncomfortable. And then you won't get these wonky petals that are like, well, that one got weird because I have a hard time reaching. Anyway, funny story speaking of nature and painting things in nature. We're in Kauai, which is just gorgeous, and I gotta look up what these pine trees are called because my daughter's an artist as well. Really, all my girls are super artsy, but we are in Kauai and we see these pine trees and we are just like amazed at how hideous these pine trees are. We're like, those are some look at the smears I've got going on here. We're like, those are some ugly pine trees, right? They really were. And it got me thinking about all the times I have painted pine trees with artists in my studio, and all the times that they were like, I hate my palm tree or my pine trees, and all the times that I'm like, they're really not as bad as you think, look at the whole picture. Because even though these pine trees in Kauai were so like, we were not loving, we didn't think they were that great, but as a whole, on the island, all these pine trees mixed with the palm trees and everything, they were beautiful. Like the big picture, right? They were all just really, really beautiful. And I started to think like, this is what it's all about when we paint nature. We're like, well, these petals are all different and it's not the same as the one I just painted, and this is hideous and I can't stand this. And then you go, you know what? Have you looked closely at the petals of flowers that are just, in the flower beds or in the fields? They're not all perfect. And that's kind of the imperfection of nature that is so beautiful, right? That was a long rant. And I'm feeling that way with this flower because my angles are crazy, but it's okay. I'm going to embrace it. I'm trying to kind of give a little curve, and I've got this spot right here. And this is what I was trying to avoid when we started, was that like empty spot where I'm like, should I put a petal or not? I'm going to do it. And then you can decide if that's what you want to do, if you run into the same problem. All right, I'm going to do it, and I'm glad I did, okay? So if you run into like, should I put a petal there, should I not? Yeah, just what's the worst that could happen? Okay, really, what's the worst that could happen? Other than you feel like you ruined your whole piece. I just want this one to be a little bit bigger right here. The other tip that's always helpful is to take the time to step back and away from your painting so that you can look at it and see what improvements you want to make on it. Because when you're up close to it for a certain period of time, it gets really tricky to see like all the things, and we just see the things that we hate instead of the bigger picture. So step back if you need to, and we're just going to keep putting our petals in. We're just going to stay committed to our petals here. And honestly, every time I look up at the big screen to see this, I'm like, I actually really do love it. And that's the thing, we kind of have to sometimes step back because it's looking good. So you can do as many layers as you want, especially that petal that kind of goes over the stem, might need some extra attention. You can keep going and going on this. I will say with every brush stroke you make on these petals, you risk changing the petal to the point that you're like, okay, now I don't like my petal. Because every time you do it, you know, it's going to get wider, it's going to get longer, different things like that. So at some point you do need to be happy with it and let it go. We always tell our artists 60%. When we're 60% happy, we're going to move on. And I'm there. I'm at my 60. I like it. So I'm going to wash that brush out. Swish that around. Grab my flat again because now it's time to finish the center of our flower. So I'm going to add some white to my yellow and I'm going to pull in some brown, just a little bit. Okay, and that's going to really kind of mute that yellow and tone it down so it's not too bright. This is my preference. Yours could be completely different. You might be saying, I love the bright. The bright is my happiness. I want to keep it. Then you do. You do keep it. I want to tone it down slightly, so I'm going to add the brown. And I'm going to go around. This is when, if you want to enclose your petals into the center, this is when you would do it. You would just make that center bigger until you were touching your petals and you could really just close them all in. I kind of like where they're at. Now if you have any situation, kind of like I do right here, where the background is really strong in there still, just you can see I went and grabbed some white to lighten the yellow a little bit so I could have some better coverage in there. And depending on, you know, how dark your background is or how much of your background you got in there or any of those things will depend on the layers that you need to do. And you can do as many as you want. All right. It is spring while I'm painting this. That's the time of year for me here where I live. And we have not experienced spring. It's still cold and it's still snowing. So I'm just smiling as I'm painting this because I'm like, yes, please come. Okay, so now I'm going to, and you can do this once your center's dry. If they're too wet, it might be tricky, but you do want it a little wet. I'm going to put some brown on the corner of my brush, and I'm going to put a shadow sort of on the bottom of my center of my flower. Just like a little peak of a shadow. So see, I'm using all my bristles and I'm coming around almost like putting a smiley face on the bottom of my center here. And go over it as many times as you need to. You don't have to have it on the first stroke. That would be a little too much pressure, right? But you do want to use all your bristles. I'm getting crazy on this one. I come around here like this. And then see, we just gave it a shadow. And some of them can be, this one up here is really light. And so if you want to go like, I want that to be darker, you can. Or again, you can just let some of them be lighter than others and not put that pressure on yourself for each of them to be exact. Okay, so this is the part of the painting where I would tell you to finish up any little things that might be bothering you, any touch-ups. One thing that's kind of bugging me is I want this to be a little darker on my jar. I don't want my stems to show as much, so I'm going to go over that again. Okay, so you can go over whatever you need to. Maybe you need to pause this and you need to do your petals 5 more times. Maybe you need some really good coverage on those petals. Whatever you need to do, you can even get your detail brush and you can come around and kind of just add some cleanup work if you want to on any of your petals. Sometimes the very tips of them, you know, when we lift our brush up, that's when they get a little bit, it pulls up a lot more paint and then we don't get the coverage, so you can kind of go around and be as picky as you want to without being super critical of yourself, and you can do whatever. You can see I've got even some white in my background from my palm resting, but all in all, I'm happy with it. So I'm going to highlight the center of my flowers, get my detail brush with some white paint, and just put this mark, this curve in them. You do want your flowers to be dry, or the center, the yellow part, to be dry before you do this step. Otherwise, it's not going to be as awesome. My paint was a little thin with that one, you can see, so I'll go over it again, but let's do this one down here. You can see kind of the step better. So just a little curve, just a little highlight. We'll do one right here as well. So you always highlight and shadow. So we got that shadow at the bottom, right, and the highlight on the top. Let's see if I can kind of fix this up. Yep, that's what I wanted. So there is a balance between super thin paint and too thick. Gotta find the balance. Guys, I love our daisies. I hope you love your daisies. I hope this painting was relaxing somewhat for you. I'm gonna grab my detail brush and some brown paint, and that's what I'm gonna sign my name with. I always encourage artists to sign their name because that's our mark, and that tells people, you know, that I made this and I'm actually proud of it, and you should be. You should be proud of your painting because you created it. And it's uncomfortable sometimes, right? It's kind of scary sometimes to go out of that box and create something, and you did that. So you should sign it and you should be super proud of yourself. I would love to see your daisies. So tag us on social media or email us the photos. It's #mylittlepaintbrush. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're Facebook. Tag us in your pictures, show us, we would love to see them. I hope you enjoyed this painting. I hope it's spring where you are or soon so that we can enjoy all these flowers, and I hope you have a great day. We will see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.